So why is there a major national debt crisis on the horizon? When U.S. debt growth started to outpace our economic growth, that's when the problem crossed an invisible line into a coming crisis. When U.S. debt growth started to be funded by the Federal Reserve creating currency, the problem crossed the point of no return.
The Fed could then come in QE3, QE4, QE5, QE6, whatever they want to do.
Now the Fed is in a situation where they are damned if they do, damned if they don't. You see, private GDP hasn't risen in 14 years. GDP has been rising because of two factors: government spending and government manipulation.
Well, as the clock to Tuesday's deadline counts down, America's debt continues to climb. And you can have a look at the website, usdebtclock.org.
The debt is growing much faster than the GDP, and ultimately we're going to have to pay this money back with interest. And the only thing that's keeping us afloat right now is 0% interest rates.
You think we have to go bankrupt?
Well, we are bankrupt.
What you're going to show us is not wonderful.
Astounding.
It is.
Amazing.
It's
very compelling. The U.S. debt clock. And this is a real-time version of what we're spending here in terms of dollars and what we have in total debt.
So this is the total, right?
Yes, $15.8 trillion.
Welcome to The Weekend with me, Steve Savant, host of the daily internet talk show, The Business Insurance Zone, from National Insurance Columnist. I'm out at a website that you need to visit, and it's called usdebtclock.org. You need to see this number, 16 trillion. We just crossed it about 3 or 4 weeks ago. 16 trillion in debt. Look at our U.S. spending right now. The budget is around 3.5 trillion, but we're only taking in 2.4 trillion in income, so we're really sitting with a deficit of about 1.1 million. When you break that down per citizen, that's $51,065. But heads up, almost half the country doesn't pay any taxes, federal taxes at all. So the actual debt per taxpayer is $140,000, 3 times that of the average citizen. When we look at these numbers, they're staggering. And in an election year in 2012, it's a huge issue. You need to walk out here, look at these numbers, and then when you go into the voting booth, make the conscious decision of which president is going to do the better job on this debt clock, which right now is completely out of control. Now let's go to the next page and look at 2016, the future election. But in the year 2016, look at the projections. I'm going to use 4 different projections on the usdebtclock.org. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, says that we'll be at $18 trillion. I don't know if the CBO has ever been right in any of their projections in any year since I've been around. The OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, predict we'll be at $20 trillion in 2016.
That is, Martha.
What?
That's a bear market, folks.
Oh, that's bad.
Fox News alert, we're a lot deeper in the hole than you think. That's the claim by an economist who says the national debt, which stands just shy of $17 trillion, isn't even close to what the government and you, the taxpayer, really owe.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Bill O'Reilly. In the Lose the Boss segment tonight, the national debt passed $18 trillion this week. And it's estimated that it could close at $20 trillion by the time President Obama leaves office.
Kasich works with props, as you can see. This represents, Kasich says, our national debt. And it's also the number of people who don't know who the hell John Kasich is. He's just in. It's also Chris Christie's step-on scale. So this is his weight. He hasn't finished stepping on.
The U.S. national debt approaching $20 trillion as we wrap up 2016. The whopping number reflects years of overspending, spanning multiple White House administrations. Well, President-elect Donald Trump and Republicans have vowed to reduce the debt. But will they be able to find a way without hurting the economy? Rich Edson has the story from our Washington bureau.
Nothing in current law is going to stop the national debt from reaching $20 trillion. And the Congressional Budget Office says nothing in law will stop $25 and $30 trillion. At the turn of the century, the federal government owed about $5.5 trillion. Now it owes nearly $20 trillion.
The debt is on an unsustainable path. It's the highest it's been for any president entering office other than President Truman, and it's expected to grow faster than the economy every year forever.
In September, the 2016 fiscal year ended.
We owe $19 trillion.
Our national debt, and we need to bring our debt under control. Well, they all agree our national debt is a major issue, but how to fix it? Not so much.
The fact is the reason why.
If you'll answer the question.
The fact is the reason why that no one wants to answer entitlements up here is because it's hard. It's a hard problem.
Washington's out of control, the debt's out of control. Nothing in that story is going to change, so you have to.
The U.S. debt is increasing an average of nearly $2.4 billion every day.
This is an unsustainable practice. It's going to end, but when it does, it's going to end very rapidly and very disruptively. We're about to enter the greatest financial reset in history. So now is the time for people to invest in hard assets, to get their plan together, and to really understand the context behind what's about to happen.
11.5 million Americans have left the workforce since 2009. We have fewer Americans working than in the year 2000, despite a population increase of 31 million people. Yet, due to data massaging from the BLS, we have a falling unemployment rate, even as the U.S. is spending more on welfare than ever before. In a recent report published by Robert A. Moffett, a professor of economics at Johns Hopkins, it was noted that welfare spending has shifted to married parent families, earning up to $47,000 a year, increasing government dependence and further expanding the welfare class. In the year 2000, 17 million Americans were enrolled in the U.S. food stamp program. Today, that number is 46 million. According to the Congressional Budget Office, interest payments on our debt will take up 36% of the budget in 2030, 58% in 2040, and 85% in 2050. However, these projections assume that rates will stay relatively low for the next 3 decades. In fiscal year 2014, the U.S. paid out $431 billion in interest payments. This includes U.S. Treasury bonds, Social Security debt, and other U.S. bonds. During the same period, the U.S. had revenues of about $3 trillion, with $1.7 trillion of this number coming from income taxes, putting U.S. debt interest payments in fiscal year 2014 at 14% of revenues and 25% of all income taxes. In 2014, the U.S. grew its revenues from $2.8 trillion to $3 trillion, a net gain of $200 billion. However, our national debt grew by $500 billion, more than 2 times the rate of U.S. total revenues. CBO is projecting by 2024 the U.S. will have revenues of $4.8 trillion, with every single year our national debt burden rising by more than double. The CBO expects trillion-dollar deficits to return by 2022. However, this is assuming the U.S. won't have a new war or a financial crisis. The U.S. hasn't been able to go without a war for more than a few years, and another financial crisis is almost certainly in the cards. Instead of including realistic projections, the CBO actually factors in 1. Economic growth, 2. Higher tax revenues as a result of this economic growth, and 3. Are you ready for this? Budget cuts. Currently, 24% of spending goes to Social Security, 22% goes to Medicaid and Medicare, and another 12% goes to welfare programs, 8% to federal pension plans, 7% to service our debt, and 20% to U.S. defense, leaving about 7% of spending for education, transportation, and all other federal programs. Wait, debt service is 7% of spending? But didn't we just say earlier that debt service was 14% of income? Yep, we sure did. You see, you have to remember that even though the U.S. grossed $3 trillion in actual revenues, it still spent about $3.5 trillion. All the more reason to see that the CBO is being reckless when they project any cuts out of Washington, D.C. Despite forecasting economic growth, the CBO continues to use historically low interest rates when making annual deficit and interest payment projections, further adding to a false projection of our future. With the manipulation of our inflation rate, GDP, unemployment, and interest rates, we seriously doubt that anyone can accurately project the future of the U.S.
pace. However, we can use some basic arithmetic. At $18 trillion in debt, with a 2.5% interest rate, the interest on our debt is about $450 billion. When our debt in just 4 years crosses $20 trillion, the interest will be $500 billion a year, assuming the U.S. can still borrow at ultra-low interest rates. If this rate even rises to 5%, the U.S. is looking at $1 trillion in interest payments. A rate closer to a historical norm puts this annual interest payment at $1.5 trillion. Our interest payments will now significantly balloon our national deficit and pile on top of our already unsustainable debt. What happens when our deficits and interest payments explode? 401k nationalizations, higher taxes, socialism, class warfare, civil unrest, loss of property rights, the end of America. Which is why I have personally taken my money out of the banking sector, safely and securely, with businesses that have been helping the world's wealthiest individuals for centuries. Anyone can do it, though. You have to government-proof your money.